Most people hear the word antimatter and imagine science fiction, explosions, strange weapons, something dangerous, exotic, and far away from daily life. But let me ask you a much quieter question, a question so simple that it almost feels harmless. Why does antimatter exist at all? Not how we use it, not how we detect it, but why it exists in the first place, because if you really stop and think about it, antimatter is not just strange, it's deeply inconvenient. According to everything we know, matter and antimatter don't get along. When they meet, they don't argue, they don't negotiate, they disappear together, completely, gone. So the obvious question is, why would the universe bother creating antimatter at all? If the universe wanted to build stars, planets, rocks, oceans, and people, antimatter seems like the worst possible ingredient. It's like building a house and, for no reason, storing a pile of explosives in the living room. And yet, antimatter exists. Not a little bit by accident, but everywhere, written into the rules of reality itself. That's where things start to get uncomfortable, because it means antimatter is not a mistake. It's not a glitch. It's not an afterthought. It's part of the design, whatever that word might mean in a universe that doesn't care about our comfort. When physicists first stumbled into antimatter, they didn't celebrate. They were confused, almost annoyed, because nature had just doubled everything. For every particle there was a mirror version. Same mass, same behavior, opposite charge, same rules flipped like left and right in a mirror. Imagine discovering that for every word you speak, there exists another word that means the exact opposite, and both are equally real. That's not helpful. That's unsettling. And the deeper question came quickly: if matter and antimatter were created together, which seems unavoidable, then where did all the antimatter go? Because look around. You don't see antimatter chairs. You don't drink antimatter water. You are not made of antimatter skin. The universe is overwhelmingly matter, so something happened. Either antimatter was almost completely erased, or matter somehow cheated. And that brings us to the heart of the mystery. The universe seems biased. Not dramatically biased. Just slightly. Just enough. A tiny imbalance at the beginning of time, so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking carefully. But that tiny unfairness is the reason anything exists at all. If matter and antimatter had been created in perfectly equal amounts, they would have wiped each other out completely. The universe would be filled with nothing but light and silence. No stars, no atoms, no questions. So the fact that you're listening to this means the universe picked a side. Just barely. Now here's the part textbooks often rush through. They tell you antimatter exists because the equations say it must. That's true, but it's not satisfying. It's like saying a bridge stands because the math works out. That doesn't tell you why the bridge doesn't fall when trucks drive over it. Feynman didn't like answers like that. He wanted to know what nature was doing, not just how to calculate it. So let's slow down and think in human terms. Think about balance. Not the kind you see in drawings where everything is symmetrical and calm. Real balance is active. A person standing upright is constantly falling and correcting, falling and correcting. Stillness is an illusion created by motion. Now imagine the early universe, not calm, not orderly. Everything rushing, colliding, transforming. In that chaos, matter and antimatter were being created as pairs, like steps in a dance. But the dance wasn't perfectly choreographed. Something leaned slightly to one side. That slight lean, almost nothing, is the reason there are galaxies instead of nothingness. So antimatter exists not because the universe wanted symmetry, but because the universe couldn't avoid it. The rules allow matter to exist only if antimatter also exists. They come as a package deal. You don't get one without the other. That's the shocking part. Antimatter is not the opposite of matter. In the way good is opposite of evil. It's more like left and right. You can't define one without the other. The universe insists on offering both, even if one mostly disappears later. And that should make you pause, because it tells us something uncomfortable about reality. The universe is not optimized for usefulness. It's optimized for consistency. It follows its rules even when those rules seem wasteful, dangerous, or unnecessary to us. Nature doesn't ask, is this efficient? It asks, is this allowed? And if it's allowed, It happens. Antimatter is allowed. So it exists, even if most of it doesn't survive, even if its presence threatens everything else. And now comes the deeper thought, the one that keeps physicists awake at night. If the universe once held almost equal amounts of matter and antimatter, then existence itself hangs on an imbalance. A tiny asymmetry, a slight preference, a microscopic unfairness. Your entire life depends on something not being perfectly balanced. Perfection, in this case, would have meant nothing at all. So maybe perfection is overrated. Maybe reality survives not because it's symmetrical, but because it's slightly broken in just the right way. And that raises a dangerous question. If existence depends on imbalance, what else do we misunderstand about stability, order, and meaning? That's where things start to get really interesting. And that's where we'll go next. Up to this point, we've seen something deeply strange. The universe allows antimatter. It even insists on it. Matter cannot appear without its mirror companion. And yet, if symmetry had been perfect, if everything had been fair and balanced, nothing would exist now. No atoms, no stars, no life, no questions. That alone should make you uneasy, because it means the universe runs on a kind of productive unfairness. Now let's sit with that idea for a moment. We are trained to admire symmetry. We call it beautiful. We call it elegant. In art, in architecture, in mathematics, symmetry feels like truth. But nature does something very different. Nature uses symmetry to write the rules, and then it breaks symmetry to make things happen. That sounds almost like a contradiction, but it isn't. Think of a pencil standing perfectly upright on a table. In theory, it could stay there forever. Perfectly balanced, perfectly symmetrical. But in reality, it never does. The tiniest vibration, the smallest breath of air, and it falls in some direction, any direction. But once it falls, something new happens. Motion begins. A direction is chosen. The early universe was like that pencil. Perfect symmetry would have meant eternal stillness. No structure, no history, just a uniform blur. But the universe didn't stay upright. It leaned, just a little, and that lean broke the symmetry between matter and antimatter. That's not a failure of the universe. That's the universe doing what it does best. Creating something by not being perfect. This is where antimatter stops being a curiosity and starts becoming a lesson. Antimatter teaches us that reality does not reward balance in the way we expect. Balance is fragile. Too much balance and nothing happens. Too much order and there is no story. You need tension. You need difference. You need imbalance. Now, when physicists talk about this, they often hide behind technical words. They'll say the laws allow tiny violations, or small preferences, or rare processes. But underneath all that language is a very simple idea. The universe had a choice point, not a conscious choice, not a decision the way we think of decisions, but a moment where multiple futures were allowed, and one of them happened. Matter won by a hair, not by strength, not by design, by chance operating inside strict rules. And that tells us something important about how reality works. The rules are rigid, the outcomes are flexible. Nature is strict about what is allowed, but careless about what actually happens. That should sound familiar. You follow rules every day. Gravity works, time moves forward, cause comes before effect, but within those rules, an infinite variety of things can happen. Your life is not scripted, but it is constrained. So was the universe. Antimatter exists because the rules demand it. Matter dominates because the outcome leaned that way, and that dominance is not complete. Even today, antimatter appears and disappears constantly, in cosmic rays, in particle collisions, in natural processes deep in space. The universe hasn't banned antimatter. It still allows it to visit briefly, like a reminder of what could have been, almost as if reality keeps its opposite around, just to stay honest. Now think about how strange that is. The universe carries within it the memory of a near cancellation, a reminder that everything you see almost didn't make it past the opening moments. Existence is not robust, it is delicate, and that delicacy is not hidden. It's everywhere if you look closely. Atoms exist, because forces almost cancel but don't. Stars shine because pressure and gravity nearly balance, but never quite. Life persists because growth and decay chase each other endlessly. Nothing settles into perfect equilibrium. The moment it does, change stops. And change stopping is the closest thing the universe has to death. This is why Feynman never liked the idea that physics was about finding final answers. He saw physics as a way of learning how nature avoids final answers. Every stable thing you see is actually a temporary compromise, a truce between competing tendencies. Matter itself is a truce. Antimatter reminds us of that. It says, this could have gone another way. And maybe that's why antimatter feels unsettling. It exposes the contingency of existence. It tells us we are not inevitable. We are leftovers. We are what remained after almost everything annihilated everything else. That's not depressing. It's astonishing, because it means existence is not guaranteed. It is earned, moment by moment, by the same imbalance that created it in the first place. Now here's a thought that might make you uncomfortable. If reality depends on imbalance at the deepest level, then maybe our instinct to seek perfect fairness, perfect symmetry, perfect resolution is misguided. Maybe creativity requires asymmetry. Maybe life requires imperfection. Maybe meaning itself emerges not from harmony, but from tension. Antimatter is not here to destroy matter. It's here to show us what happens when symmetry goes too far. And the universe learned that lesson early. It allowed symmetry to exist in the rules and then immediately broke it in practice. That's not hypocrisy. That's wisdom. Because rules without exceptions create nothing, and exceptions without rules create chaos. Reality lives in between. And now, having seen this, you might ask a more personal question. If existence itself depends on imbalance, what does that say about uncertainty, doubt, and instability in our own lives? What if those things are not flaws, but necessary conditions? That's where this stops, being just about physics. And that's where we'll go next. In the final part, we'll step back and ask what antimatter really tells us about meaning, humility, and why the universe doesn't owe us a clean, comfortable explanation for why anything exists at all. All right, let's finish this the right way. Slowly, thoughtfully, without pretending there is a neat bow to tie at the end. Because if antimatter has taught us anything at all, it's that reality does not like neat endings. So far, we've uncovered something quietly disturbing. Existence is not the default state of the universe. It's the exception, a fragile outcome of imbalance, a leftover from a process that almost erased everything. That alone should change how you look at the world. We tend to think the universe is here for something, for life, for intelligence, for meaning. But antimatter tells a different story. It tells us the universe is not aiming at outcomes. It is obeying rules, and whatever survives those rules gets to exist. Meaning is not built into the universe like a label on a box. Meaning is something that appears inside the universe once things manage to last long enough. And that should humble us, because it means the universe didn't promise us anything. It didn't promise atoms. It didn't promise stars. It didn't promise consciousness. All of those emerged because a delicate imbalance happened to hold. Now here's where people usually ask, but why that imbalance? Why not the other way? Why not antimatter instead of matter? And that question sounds reasonable, but it hides a trap. It assumes there must be a reason that satisfies human intuition. Feynman was very clear about this. Nature is under no obligation to make sense to us in the way we want. Sometimes the deepest answer is simply that's what happened. Not because science is lazy, but because reality does not operate like a story written for an audience. There may be explanations, deeper mechanics, subtle processes we don't fully understand yet, and science will keep looking. That's what it does. But even if we uncover every mechanism, one truth will remain. The universe could have been otherwise, and that is the most uncomfortable idea of all, because it means our existence is not necessary. It is contingent. You are not here because the universe needed you. You are here because the universe allowed you. An allowance is a very different thing from intention. Now, notice what this does to the way you think about certainty. If existence itself hangs on tiny differences, then absolute confidence is an illusion. Stability is always temporary. Permanence is always conditional. That doesn't make life meaningless, it makes it precious. A universe that guarantees everything would be boring. A universe that risks nothing would create nothing worth noticing. Antimatter is a reminder of risk, a reminder that the universe gambled, not consciously, not emotionally, but structurally. And something unexpected survived, and that something was complexity. From imbalance came structure, from structure came chemistry, from chemistry came life, from life came minds that wonder why anything exists at all. That chain did not have to happen, and yet it did. Now here's the part that often gets missed. The same universe that almost erased itself also created beings capable of understanding that near erasure. That's not destiny. That's irony. We are made of matter that barely won. Our thoughts are patterns that survived annihilation. Even now, at the smallest scales, matter and antimatter still meet and vanish. The universe continues to flirt with nothingness, moment by moment. And yet here we are. So what does that say about how we should live? It suggests something quietly radical. Stop demanding guarantees. Stop waiting for perfect balance before acting. Stop believing that stability means safety. The universe itself did not wait for perfect conditions. It moved forward on an imbalance and let consequences unfold. Understanding physics this way doesn't make you feel powerful. It makes you feel small, but in a good way, a grounded way. You realize that certainty is rare, control is limited, and yet participation is unavoidable. You are part of the imbalance now. Your actions, your thoughts, your choices. They don't exist outside the rules, but they are not predetermined by them either. They are outcomes inside constraints, just like matter itself. And maybe that's the deepest connection between antimatter and human life. Existence is not about winning completely. It's about not canceling out. It's about lasting long enough to do something meaningful before the balance shifts again. So when you hear that antimatter exists, don't think of it as a threat or a curiosity. Think of it as a message from the universe's opening moments. A message that says, this did not have to work, but it did. And that message applies to more than physics. It applies to civilizations, to relationships, to ideas, to you. Nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is permanent. And yet here is something right now, thinking, listening, wondering, that is not trivial. That is astonishing. And maybe the most honest conclusion is not an answer at all, but a recognition. The universe did not choose meaning. Meaning emerged because the universe allowed imbalance. Antimatter exists to remind us how close everything came to disappearing, and matter exists to remind us that sometimes, against overwhelming odds, something remains, and that something asks questions. And perhaps that is enough, not a final explanation, not a comforting certainty,